I was sitting at my desk at work, staring at my laptop screen when my phone buzzed with a bank notification. I almost ignored it. I was in the middle of reviewing a quarterly report, coffee going cold beside me, and the last thing I wanted was another routine alert. But something made me pick up the phone. Some small stupid instinct that I wish even now I had ignored. The notification read, "Withdrawal confirmed. Amount $47,200. Account balance $31,244. I read it 3 times. Then I read it a 4th time, slower, like the numbers might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. $47,200 gone in a single transaction. From the joint savings account that Stella and I had been building together for years. The account we called our future fund. The one earmarked for the house we were supposed to buy. The down payment we had scraped together through overtime shifts and skipped vacations and nights I cooked at home instead of taking her out, because every $100 mattered. $31,244. That was what years of our life together had been reduced to. I sat completely still for a long moment. The office noise around me, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, a colleague laughing at something down the hall. All of it sounded distant and muffled like I was hearing it through water. Then I dialed Stella's number. She picked up on the second ring, her voice warm and slightly distracted with the way it always sounded when she was multitasking. "Hey babe, you on lunch already?" "Stella," I said. My voice came out flat. "What happened to our savings account?" A pause. 1 second. 2. 3. That pause told me everything before she spoke a single word. "I was going to tell you tonight," she said. I closed my eyes. "Tell me now. Let me go back, because you need to understand what I believed about my marriage before that phone call, or none of what happened after makes any sense. Stella and I met years ago at a mutual friend's birthday party. She was laughing at something across the room when I first saw her, head thrown back, completely unself-conscious, and I thought she was the most alive person I had ever seen. We were together within a month, engaged within 2 years, married in a small ceremony at a lakeside venue with 40 guests and wildflowers on every table because that was what she wanted, and I would have moved mountains to give it to her. I love that woman the way you love someone when you're still stupid enough to think love is a permanent shield against everything. I worked doubles at the engineering firm when we were trying to get ahead. I passed on a job opportunity in Seattle because she'd just been promoted at her company, and I refused to ask her to give that up. I cooked dinner 4 nights a week because she hated cooking, and I didn't mind. I let her redecorate the apartment twice, sat through what felt like a million paint swatches each time and smiled, because watching her excited about something made me feel like the luckiest man alive. Our savings account was sacred to us. Or so I thought. We had named it actually, not officially obviously, but between ourselves we called it the house fund. Every month, automatic transfers from both our paychecks. We had a shared spreadsheet, a projected purchase date. We had driven through 3 different neighborhoods on a Sunday afternoon, pointing at houses through the car window, arguing playfully about whether we wanted a yard big enough for a dog. Weeks before that Tuesday, Stella had squeezed my hand across the dinner table and said, "We're almost there, Ryan. Can you believe it?" And I had squeezed back and said, "I believe it." I believed everything. Now on the phone, she was telling me she'd been going to tell me tonight. "Tell me now," I said again. "It's for Natalie's wedding." Natalie, her sister, 26 years old, through and through impulsive and reckless, who had announced her engagement to a man she'd been dating for barely any time and decided she wanted the wedding of the century on a crazy tight timeline. Ryan, she had no money. Mom couldn't help. The venue deposit alone was 18 grand, and they were going to lose the date. "Stella, and I knew you'd say no if I asked, so you just took it." The words came out quiet, dangerously quiet. "You took $47,000 from our account. The house money. For years of our house money. I'm going to pay it back." "With what?" "I'll figure it out." "With what, Stella?" My voice cracked the way glass cracks before it shatters. "We don't have 47,000 lying around somewhere else. That was everything. That was our down payment. That was the house, Ryan. And she's my sister." I hung up. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 40 minutes before I could drive. I didn't cry. I was too far past crying. I just sat there and felt the floor of my life give way beneath me. And I thought about the spreadsheet, the projected purchase date, a Sunday afternoon driving through neighborhoods with my wife's hand resting on my knee. And then slowly I thought about the fact that she had said, I knew you'd say no if I asked. She had known. She had looked at our account, looked at our future, looked at 4 years of my labor and sacrifice, and she had decided that her sister's wedding was more important. She hadn't asked me. She hadn't even given me the chance to say no. She had simply taken it and planned to tell me tonight, as if that made it better. As if the timing of the confession changed the nature of the theft. Because that was what it was. I want to be precise about this. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an impulsive moment of panic that she immediately regretted. She had transferred $47,000 and then gone about her Tuesday, picking up the phone, warm and distracted, and waited for the bank notification to do her explaining for her. I drove home. I needed to see her face when she said these things to me. I needed to watch her tell me to my face that this was acceptable. She was already home when I walked in. She must have left work early, which told me she had known this was coming and had wanted to get ahead of it. She was standing in the kitchen with a glass of wine. And when she saw my face, she set the glass down carefully. Ryan, how long? I said. How long have you been planning this? She exhaled. About 6 weeks. 6 weeks. I had sat across from this woman at dinner for 6 weeks, had slept beside her, had talked about paint colors and mortgage rates, and whether we wanted 2 bedrooms or 3. And for 6 weeks, she had known what she was going to do and said nothing. For 6 weeks, she had let me believe we were building something together while she planned to dismantle it alone. It's $47,000, Stella. I know what it is. Do you? I stepped closer because I wanted to make sure you understood the number you're dealing with. That's 4 years. 4 years of automatic transfers and skipped trips and eating at home. That's me turning down Seattle for you. That's every Saturday I worked overtime while you went out with Natalie, by the way. While you went out with the person you apparently love enough to fund a fairy tale wedding at my expense. Her jaw tightened. That's not fair. Not fair. I laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. Tell me about not fair, Stella. You tell me what's fair about what you did. She needed help. She's my family. I'm your family, I said. I said it quietly and watched that land. I'm your husband. We were a family. This account, this plan, this was us. It was our life we were building. And you handed it to your sister without even asking me. She looked away. You would have said no. Then I would have said no, I said. My voice filled the apartment. That was my right. You don't get to decide you know what I'll say and then act without me. That's not a marriage, Stella. Or that's you using me as a bank and doing whatever you want anyway. I was trying to help my family. I am your family. The word bounced off the walls. She flinched. I stood there with my chest heaving and watched her open her mouth and close it again. And somewhere in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. Something that had been bending for years under the weight of 1,000 small accommodations. And I felt it finally, cleanly break. Did you ever intend to tell me? I asked, voice dropping back to flat. If the bank hadn't sent that notification today, when were you going to tell me? Another pause. Tonight? I told you tonight. You were going to tell me tonight because you had to. Because the money was already gone and you needed me to find out somehow. I looked at her. Really looked at her. Was this the first time? She blinked. What? Was this the first time you went into that account without telling me? First time you made a major financial decision without consulting me? The pause before she answered was a fraction of a second too long. Yes. I didn't believe her. I didn't say that yet, but I filed it away. And I went to the bedroom and I sat on the edge of the bed and I started to think very clearly about what came next. That night, after Stella had fallen into a restless sleep beside me, or pretended to, I'll never know which, I lay awake in the dark and did not feel grief. I expected to feel grief. I waited for it. Instead, what I felt was a cold, crystalline clarity. The kind that settles over you when the last illusion burns away and you can finally see the shape of things as they actually are. My wife had stolen from me. She had done it knowingly, deliberately, and with 6 weeks of premeditation. She had looked at my trust and decided it was a resource to be exploited. She had looked at our future and decided it was hers to spend. And beneath that, circling like a slow drain, was the thing she had said. I knew you'd say no if I asked. Because that sentence wasn't just a confession. It was a worldview. It told me that somewhere in the architecture of our marriage, she had stopped thinking of us as equal partners and started thinking of me as an obstacle to be managed. Someone whose opinion didn't count. Someone to work around. I got up at 3 in the morning and went to the kitchen table with my laptop. I opened our bank records. All of them, not just the savings account. I started going back 18 months. By 5 in the morning, I had found 4 other transfers I hadn't known about. Nothing as large as this one, but not small either. $1,100 to Natalie, labeled in the memo field as loan. Never repaid. $800 to Stella's mother for a home repair I'd never heard about. 2 transfers to a personal account of Stella's that I hadn't known existed, totaling just over $3,000. I sat back in my chair and looked at the ceiling. She had been doing this for over a year. Small amounts first, testing whether I'd notice. And when I didn't, because I had trusted her completely, had never once audited our shared account because trust isn't supposed to require auditing, she had scaled up. She had graduated from hundreds to thousands to $47,000 because each time I hadn't noticed, each time I hadn't said anything, she had taken my silence for permission. My brother Daniel called at 7 in the morning because I'd texted him at 4 asking him to call when he was up. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is his gift. And when I finished, there was a long pause. "What do you need?" he said. "I need a lawyer's number," I said. "And I need you to help me think this through." Daniel was at my apartment by 9 with his friend, who happened to be a divorce attorney. We sat in the kitchen while Stella was still asleep, and I laid out everything I'd found. The attorney, a quiet, methodical man named George, looked through the records I'd printed and said, "This is financial abuse. I want you to understand that. This is a documented pattern." I had not used that phrase before. Hearing it from someone else made something in my chest go very still. "What are my options?" I asked. We talked for 2 hours. When Stella finally emerged from the bedroom, still in her pajamas, she found me sitting at the kitchen table across from my brother and a man she'd never seen before. And she stopped in the doorway and understood immediately what was happening. "Ryan," she said. Her voice had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by something guarded and frightened. "What is this?" "This is me saying no," I said. "A little late, but better than never. I won't pretend the next 2 weeks were clean or simple. They weren't." Stella went through all the stages. Denial, bargaining, anger, tearful apologies, and then back to anger when the apologies didn't work. She called it an overreaction. She told me I was punishing her for caring about her family. She told me she'd pay every dollar back, though when I asked her to put that in writing, she suddenly became less specific about the timeline. She called her mother, who called me to explain that family helps family, as though I had missed this lesson. She called her sister Natalie, who sent me a long text that I did not respond to about how the wedding had been beautiful and wasn't that worth something. I stared at that text for a long time. Then I forwarded it to my lawyer. Meanwhile, I was not idle. George had advised me to separate my finances immediately, which I did. I opened a new personal account, redirected my direct deposit, and froze any future access to the joint account. Not that there was much left in it. I contacted our bank's fraud investigation department and documented the unauthorized transfers. George told me that given the evidence, I had strong grounds not just for divorce, but potentially for civil recovery of the misappropriated funds. I told my parents. My mother's silence on the phone when I told her was somehow worse than if she'd shouted. My father said, "Son, you come home this weekend. You come home, and we'll figure this out together." I didn't go home that weekend. There was too much to handle. But hearing him say it cracked something open in me that I hadn't let myself feel yet. I had trusted her completely. I had built my life around that trust. And she had looked at it, calculated its worth, and spent it. I also called Stella's employer's HR department. Not to cause trouble. I want to be clear about my reasoning. But Stella and I worked in the same broad professional circle. Our companies occasionally partnered on projects, and George had advised me to create a clear paper trail that established the timeline of our separation. In doing that research, I discovered something I hadn't known. Stella had listed herself as single on several professional profiles and networking platforms going back 9 months. 9 months while wearing my ring, while sleeping in my bed. I didn't confront her about this directly. I sent it to George and let him add it to the file. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in layers, each one revealing another below it. And every time you think you've reached the bottom, you discover there's further to fall. Every new piece of information was its own small shock, its own recalibration of what I thought I had known. I started going to the gym at 5 in the morning because I couldn't sleep anyway, and lying in the dark was making me insane. Within 2 weeks, my body had remembered what it felt like to be pushed hard. and I found that exhausting myself physically was the only thing that cut through the noise in my head. I dropped 8 pounds. My friend Adrian noticed and said, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." I almost laughed. Adrian and I had been friends since college. When I told him the full story over drinks one night, which turned into 3 nights because it took that long to get it all out, he was quiet for a long moment and then said, "I always thought she looked at you like a category, like a husband-shaped object." I asked him what he meant. He said, "Like you were useful, not like you were a person she couldn't live without." I have thought about that sentence approximately 10,000 times since. 14 days after the bank notification, I came home to find Stella and Natalie in the living room together. Natalie was holding what I can only describe as a prepared speech. I could tell because she kept glancing down at her phone as she talked, reading. She told me I was being dramatic, that the money would be paid back, that she was sorry it had happened this way, but the wedding had been the happiest day of her life, and surely I could understand that love required sacrifice. I looked at Natalie for a long moment. Then I looked at Stella. "Were you in on the plan?" I asked her. "When she decided she needed the money, was that a conversation you two had together?" Stella didn't answer, which was its own answer. "I see," I said. I pulled out my phone and showed them both a document on the screen. "This is a legal filing. It documents 4 separate unauthorized transfers from our joint account over 14 months, totaling just over $60,000 when you include the most recent withdrawal." I watched Natalie's eyes go wide. "Your name appears in the memo fields of some of these transactions. George tells me that makes you potentially liable as a knowing recipient of funds obtained through financial fraud." Natalie stood up very quickly. "I didn't. I had no idea she was doing it without." "Then you should probably get a lawyer," I said pleasantly, "just to make sure you're protected." Natalie left 12 minutes later. She did not deliver the rest of her prepared speech. Stella stared at me from across the room. She looked different than she had 2 weeks ago. The confidence she'd had in that first night was gone. Something underneath it had surfaced. Something raw and less controlled. "You're going to destroy my family over money," she said. "You destroyed our family over your sister's wedding," I said. "I'm just dealing with the consequences." That night, while Stella was at Natalie's house, where she increasingly seemed to be spending her time, which suited me fine, I packed a bag. Not my bag. Hers. I want to be precise about this because people sometimes misunderstand what I was doing. I was not throwing her out in a rage. I was not acting impulsively. I had thought about this carefully, had discussed it with George, and had verified that in our state, given that the lease on the apartment was solely in my name, a fact I had never thought about before because it had never mattered, I had the right to ask her to leave, and she had no legal standing to refuse. I had given her 2 weeks of warning, clearly stated, during which she had spent more time lobbying me than packing. So that night, with a calm that surprised even me, I packed her things. I was organized and thorough. Clothes, shoes, the personal items from the bathroom, the books that were hers, the photographs from her childhood that sat on the bookshelf. I packed them all into the large suitcases we'd bought for a trip to Europe, a trip we'd saved for separately from the house fund, or so I had thought, though now I wondered. And I stacked them by the front door. I found her record collection, which she loved. I packed that carefully, making sure nothing would break. I found the jewelry box she kept on the dresser and placed it intact in a padded bag. I found the throw blanket her grandmother had made her and folded it on top of the nearest suitcase. I was not trying to hurt her. I was not being cruel. I was simply acknowledging through action what had already become true. She didn't live here anymore. She had made her choices. The apartment was mine. The future I'd planned here was something I would have to reimagine, but it was still mine. And it started with this. With packing these suitcases and knowing that when she came back, she would not be coming home. She came back at 11:30 at night and found the bags at the door and me sitting in the living room. Calm. Waiting. She looked at the bags for a long time. Then she looked at me. "You're serious?" she said. "I've been serious since Tuesday," I said. "You just didn't take it seriously." Her face crumpled. And I want to be honest here. Watching her face crumple did cause me pain. I had loved this woman for 6 years. Pain was appropriate. I felt it, and I sat with it, and I let it exist without letting it change anything. "Ryan," she said. Her voice was small in a way it had never been in all the years I'd known her. "I made a terrible mistake. I know that. I know I went about this completely wrong." "You went about it fraudulently," I said. "Let's use the right words." "Please," she said. She sat down across from me on the edge of the coffee table, her hands pressed together in her lap. Please don't end us. We can fix this. I'll get a second job. I'll pay it back. Every dollar, I swear it. It's not about the money, Stella, I said quietly and meant every word. I mean, it is about the money because that money was our future. But it's about what you decided when you took it. You decided I didn't matter. You decided my opinion was an inconvenience. You decided our marriage was something you could make unilateral decisions about, and I'd fall in line. I paused. I found the other transfers. All of them. Going back 14 months. She went very still. I found the personal account, I said. The one I didn't know about. The one you've been moving money into. She opened her mouth, closed it. I found your professional profiles, I said. The ones where you listed yourself as single for the past 9 months. The room was very quiet. I don't know what your life actually looked like, I said, in the parts you kept from me. I'm not sure I want to know. But I know that the woman I married, the woman I built 4 years of savings for, she wasn't hiding accounts and falsifying her status and skimming money out of our future for over a year. That person is not the person I thought I was building a house with. I stood up. The bags are packed. Your sister is expecting you. I called her and let her know you were coming because despite everything, I didn't want you to be alone at midnight with nowhere to go. Her head snapped up. You called Natalie. I called Natalie. Ryan. Good night, Stella. I walked to the bedroom and closed the door, and I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the sound of her crying in the living room, and then the sound of the front door closing, and then silence. I sat in the silence for a long time. It was a different kind of silence than the apartment had held before. Not empty, not absent, but clarified, like a room that has been cleaned of something that had been slowly rotting in it. So gradually you'd stopped being able to smell it. The divorce filing went through George's office 3 days later. I was told by mutual friends, those who still reached out, which was fewer than I expected and somehow not surprising, that Stella was shocked by the speed of it, that she had expected more time, more conversation, more of a chance to negotiate me back into acceptance. She didn't understand that the decision had been made that Tuesday morning in a parking garage, and everything since had been logistics. George was thorough and effective. The documentation of the unauthorized transfers was damning. The hidden personal account, which when subpoenaed, showed a pattern of small diversions that read, in his words, and then in the formal filing, as systematic financial misconduct within a marriage. The civil claim for the misappropriated funds was filed alongside the divorce petition. Stella hired a lawyer who told her apparently that she had very little ground to stand on. She came back to me once more through George as intermediary with a settlement offer that was essentially a promise to repay the money over 7 years in monthly installments. George told me I could do better. I told him to keep going. The final settlement gave me a recovery timeline of 3 years secured against her assets with legal penalties built in for missed payments. I also received the full equity in our jointly owned investment account, which I had not initially expected, or George said the pattern of behavior had persuaded the mediator to lean in my direction. I signed the paperwork on a Thursday afternoon in a conference room that smelled like carpet cleaner. And I drove home, and I sat in the apartment that had only ever had my name on the lease. And I felt something that took me a moment to identify. Relief. Deep physical relief. The kind that lives in the muscles in the chest and the back of the throat. That was more than a year ago. I want to tell you what the year looked like because it wasn't triumphant from the first day. It was not a movie montage. It was Tuesday mornings when I woke up and reached for someone who wasn't there and felt the absence like a cold draft. It was recalibrating every plan I'd made. The neighborhood, the yard, the third bedroom, and figuring out which of those things I still wanted and which had been hers and which had been mine all along. But here is what is also true. I bought a house. Not the house we had planned, not in the neighborhood we had circled on a Sunday afternoon, but a house that is entirely mine with a backyard where I have planted things that will come up in the spring and walls that I painted myself in colors I chose without consulting anyone. I closed on it months after the divorce was finalized using a combination of the settlement recovery payments and savings. I rebuilt faster than I thought possible because I am, it turns out, very good at saving money when I'm not hemorrhaging it into someone else's vision of the future. I focused on my career, which I had quietly coasted in for years because we had been talking about starting a family and I hadn't wanted to take on more travel. A conversation we had never finished. I realize now because she had been non-committal in a way I had told myself was just not being ready. My career launched. I took a project lead role that I had been hesitating on. It went well. Well enough that I was offered a senior position months later that came with a salary increase that frankly made the settlement payments feel like small change. I started running. Not just the gym. Running outside early in the mornings before the city was fully awake, when the streets belonged to the serious people and the dogs and the occasional delivery truck. I ran my first half marathon in October. My time was not impressive, but I finished. And I stood at the finish line in the cold morning air with my hands on my knees and thought, I can do hard things. I have always been able to do hard things. Daniel took me to a friend's birthday gathering, and I met a woman named Claire who worked in urban planning and argued with me about highway infrastructure for 45 minutes before I realized we had migrated to a corner of the room and everyone else had given up trying to include us in the larger conversation. We had coffee the following week, then dinner. Then the week after that, she came to see the new house before I'd even finished unpacking. And she sat on the floor of the empty living room with me eating takeout and said, "Tell me what this house is supposed to be." And I told her, and she listened with her whole body in the way that certain people listen. And I thought, oh, this is what it was supposed to feel like all along. I am taking it slow. I told her that from the beginning, and she said, I'm not going anywhere. And so far she has been accurate. It is different from what I had before in every way that matters. She asks my opinion. I ask hers. When we disagree, it's a conversation that ends in a decision we both made, not a resolution I discover after the fact. Small things. Enormous things. The whole architecture of it is different. I saw Stella once about 3 months ago. I didn't plan it. I was at a farmer's market on a Saturday morning carrying a bag of apples and a bunch of flowers I was bringing to Claire's place when I heard someone say my name. I turned and she was there. We're standing between vegetable stalls, and the first thing I noticed was how different she looked. Not dramatically, not devastated or broken, but different in a specific way that I took a moment to identify. She looked smaller. Not physically, but in that quality of presence she'd always had, that brightness. It had dimmed. She was not with anyone. She looked like she had not been with anyone in a long time. Ryan, she said. She said it again, like she was confirming to herself that I was real. You look, she stopped. I knew how I looked. I had run 12 miles that morning. I was carrying flowers for a woman who made me laugh every single day. I was wearing the jacket I'd bought to celebrate the senior promotion. I did not say any of this. I just stood there and watched her do the math. How are you? She asked. Really good, I said, and I meant it with every part of myself. She looked at the flowers. Something moved across her face. Are you seeing someone? Yes, I said. Simple. No additional information offered. She nodded slowly, and she pressed her lips together. And then she said the thing I had been waiting somewhere deep and unexamined to hear her say. I ruined it, didn't I? I ruined something real. I considered several responses. I considered being cold. I considered being generous. In the end, I just told her the truth. You made your choices, I said. I made mine. I think they both led us where we were supposed to end up. I said goodbye. I walked to my car. I drove to Claire's apartment, and she opened the door and said the flowers were beautiful. And I stood in her kitchen while she put them in a vase. And I thought about that Tuesday in a parking garage, and how small and terrible it had felt, and how impossible it had seemed that anything could be built out of the rubble of that morning. We build out of rubble all the time. We are better at it than we know. Someone asked me recently if I regret the years I spent with Stella. The question surprised me, and I sat with it for a few days before I had an answer. No, I don't regret them. Not because they were good years. Some of them were genuinely good. Some of them really weren't. And I won't revise that history to make the ending easier to understand. Not because I was wrong to love her or trust her. I was right to do both with the information I had. I don't regret them because those years built things in me that I still carry. The capacity to save towards something. The knowledge of what I want in a house and a yard and a life. The understanding of what a real partnership looks and feels like drawn in perfect contrast to what a false one costs. Every lesson was expensive. None of it was wasted. The house is warm in the evenings now. Claire is there on weekends, and we are slowly, carefully building a version of the future that belongs to both of us and was decided together. I have a dog. Finally, the dog we had talked about in the car that Sunday afternoon. A ridiculous golden creature named Biscuit who sheds on everything and has no concept of personal space and is the best decision I have made in recent memory. The savings account is healthy again. The recovery payments from the settlement come in reliably, and honestly, I barely think about them anymore. My senior position comes with quarterly reviews, and last quarter mine was exceptional. George sends a card at Christmas. Daniel calls on Sundays. My father, when I showed him pictures of the house, said, "That's a real home, son." And I had to sit with that for a moment before I could respond. They were right. All the people who said I'd be okay. They were right in the way that only makes sense in retrospect. From the other side of it, when you can look back at the worst morning of your life and understand finally that it was not an ending. It was a clarification. $47,200. The price of learning exactly who I was, exactly what I was worth, exactly what I refused to accept. Best investment I never made.